He is a military historian, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and a New York Times best-selling author. Tonight he joins us to talk about citizenship, specifically U.S. citizenship. He's written a brand new book on the subject, The Dying Citizen: How Progressive Elites, Tribalism, and Globalism Are Destroying the Idea of America. Please welcome Victor Davis Hanson to the program. Victor, thanks for being here. The Dying Citizen, the book paints a rather grim picture, Victor, of the nation's current condition. In the introduction, you write, contemporary events have reminded Americans that their citizenship is fragile and teetering on the abyss. And yet the calamities can also teach, indeed energize them to rebuild and recover what they have lost. What inspired you to write this now, and why focus on the question of citizenship?
I was trying to make sense of all of the anger and unrest of that terrible year, 2020, in terms of historical lessons, whether from actual history or philosophers. And I came to the conclusion that all of these things could be grouped together as illustrating a lack of citizenship, that when you have a middle class, a powerful, autonomous, independent middle class, then you don't have the tyranny of the very wealthy, whether that's the Silicon Valley wealthy or the Wall Street, and then you don't have the romance or the large numbers of the subsidized poor. And I talk about the importance historically of borders, of non-tribalism, that you judge people by the appearance, not by their superficial appearance, but by their common citizenship or their common bonds with people of their same space, of their sacred space. And then I talk about the elite attack on citizenship, whether the permanent administrative state, these people we did not elect, whether they're Anthony Fauci or Mark Milley or James Comey or James Clapper. And then the evolutionaries, Raymond, these are the people who feel human nature is so fluid and mobile, we have to keep updating the Constitution, whether that means scrapping the Electoral College or the traditions of a 9-person Supreme Court or 180-year filibuster and on and on. And finally, I talk about globalism. But the point is that from the bottom up, tribalism, illegal immigration, destruction of middle class, and from the elite down, the permanent state, the evolutionary impulse and globalization were emasculating the autonomous citizen. And all of this chaos we've seen the first 10 months, open borders, 2 million people coming across, the contradictions of citizens having to be vaccinated if they're in the military or federal employees, but not 2 million people who are non-citizens, or the sudden rampant inflation or the supply chain that's really hurting the middle class, and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Victor, let's talk about that for a second. This inflation rate hit a 31-year high last month. Consumer prices are well over 6% at this point. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is downplaying the numbers. She's saying high inflation won't persist beyond the next year, and she promised that the Fed will act to prevent 70s-style runaway inflation. Listen.
I expect that next year, many of the supply bottlenecks that we're experiencing now in opening up our economy will recede. Sometime during the second half of the year, we'll see inflation rates moving back toward the 2% that we regard as normal.
Now, Victor, your thoughts. How does she know high inflation will not persist? And can the Fed just wave this away?
No, I think she's wrong. And I think people on the left, like Larry Summers, have said she's wrong because she's not giving us all the information, Raymond. We owe $30 trillion. We're racking up deficits now at $2 trillion a year, and we're artificially keeping interest rates low because we can't service that debt without cutting vast social programs. So we're having this rendezvous with something's going to give, and people are not going to give their money to banks to lend out for 30 years at 3% when they're losing 7%, 8% on it a year. So when that happens, we know what Paul Volcker faced, and he was a lot more capable than Janet Yellen. And he said, we're going to have to raise interest rates and break inflation. And that caused a recession, and then we had stagflation. But he did get us out of it. But it was a miserable, as you remember, It was a miserable
Right.
time from 1977 all the way to 1983. And it almost sank Ronald Reagan because he didn't get out of it for the
Right.
first 2 years. And so we're
Yeah.
headed in the wrong direction. And you're absolutely right to talk about the contempt they have for the middle class citizen when Ron Kane, the chief of staff, retweets a Harvard professor saying, well, inflation's just a matter of the high class. Tell that to somebody who can't afford a mammogram or can't put diesel
Right.
fuel in their tractor. There's a
No,
contempt for
the middle class are being clobbered. They're being clobbered by these price hikes, and we're talking gas, bread, milk, steak, turkey. I mean, forget Christmas gifts. They can't get bare essentials for some of them. It's breaking their budget.
And they're self-induced. The problems are not because we're at war or Katrina. Think about it. We cancel pipelines. We cancel ANWR. We cancel new federal leases. We tell frackers you're going to be out of business in 10 years. We threaten them with price hikes and more regulation. We're pumping through almost 3 million barrels less than we were just 18 months ago. And then we beg the Saudis or we beg the Russians.
But what do you make of the remedy? The remedy from Washington is let's pass a $1.75 trillion infrastructure package. How much of that actually goes to true infrastructure we have to decipher down the road. But then here comes the Build Back Better. Massive $4 trillion is what it's expected to blow here. Is that going to cure what ails us? Or does that simply deepen the crisis?
That's what's really, that's Orwellian, because we know why they lost in Virginia and almost lost in New Jersey and had setbacks throughout the country. And that was because they had a cultural agenda that nobody wanted, and they were afraid of it. They were afraid their cities were not safe to walk at night. They were afraid of inflation. They were afraid their kids were being taught to hate people on the basis of their race. They were insulted when they brought their complaints to elected school boards. It wasn't because, as the Democrats claim, they didn't pass $4 trillion in borrowed printed money for more entitlements. And that was not the reason. Yet they're doubling down. So they've learned nothing and they've forgotten nothing. And they're going to continue to do that. And we know what the path out of this is. We saw it with those concerned parents, Raymond. The middle class has to rise up and say, Anthony Fauci's got to go. He's not told the truth. He's not accountable. He has no business telling landlords that they can't collect rent. He's exceeded his powers. Mark Milley, James Clapper, John Brennan, all of them are judge, jury, and executioner, administrative people. And we have to take control of these people. They were not elected in the most part, and they are exercising powers that we never dreamed they would have.
Let's talk about the border crisis, which you raise in the book. Let's face it, this is not a new phenomenon, though more under control under previous administrations. Recently, there was talk that the Biden administration was looking to pay illegal immigrants whose families were separated at the border nearly $500,000 in compensation. He reacted a little prickly when confronted with that idea. Listen.
No, I didn't say that. Let's get it straight. You said everybody coming across the border gets $450,000.
The number was what you had a problem
The number
with.
I was referring to.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing.
Sure.
If, in fact, because of the outrageous behavior of the last administration, you coming across the border, whether it was legal or illegal, and you lost your child, it's gone. You deserve some kind of compensation, no matter what the circumstance. What that will be, I have no idea.
He has no idea. Now, reports are saying the plan has been rejected, but what does it say about U.S. border policy and the policy towards people just coming into your country, crossing the border, that this plan was even considered, Victor?
There's two things that are going on, Raymond. One is these people, it's not that the border is porous. We have no border. 2 million people in a time of a pandemic with no request, no mandate that they have to be vaccinated in the way that citizens have to in many professions. So they don't believe in a border. They think this is normal. And the second is that they cannot tell the truth about it, because if they were to tell the truth about it, people would be even angrier than they are. And what do I mean by that? When Joe Biden says the prior administration, Donald Trump inherited the quote-unquote cages from Barack Obama, because Obama found out that people were deliberately coming over with small children, and then they were deliberately hoping that because they'd heard of amnesty and DACA, that they would be given privilege, and then they would be anchor children for themselves. And they were breaking the law. And you could see this when Deputy Secretary, Press Secretary Jean-Pierre was caught, and she was asked specifically, why are you giving $450,000 with people who came here illegally that have complaints against the United States the moment they came in, but you're not going to do it for legal? And she said, why would we give people who came legally any money? In other words, they have contempt for people who follow the law and line up, because this is a deliberate policy to import people who are impoverished, and they will be taught as soon as they come across the border that you have real grievances against your host who asks nothing of you. And they see this as a constituency, because they understand the longer that people are in this country and assimilate and intermarry and integrate, they become conservative, and they start to lose that constituency if it's not renewed.
Yeah, no, it's a cruel policy, because it entices very poor and suffering people to come and risk their family, their lives. I mean, people talk about human dignity. There is look, I'm one of the few people who've been at the border, pulled these people out of the Rio Grande. You know, I know firsthand, I've seen it and touched it. I see their pain and their suffering and what they're going through, and the human indignity of what they suffer. But they do it because of lousy policies that are shining a neon sign saying, come on in, come now. And that is cruel. That policy is cruel, and it is completely chaotic. But what is that policy, coupled with the idea I read in the New York Times last weekend that non-citizens should be allowed to vote? What does all of this say about U.S. citizenship and the unique privilege it is?
There is no unique citizenship. I mean, when we had the idea of citizenship in the West in general, the United States in particular, were 7 or 8 key elements that distinguish a citizen from a resident, legal or otherwise. One was only a citizen could vote. Only a citizen would be eligible for federal entitlements. Only a citizen would serve in the military. Only a citizen could go back and forth across a border at will. And if you look at it very carefully, everybody who says they are a resident, even if under illegal auspices, can get federal entitlements. We have elections right now in California for local school boards where people who are not citizens are voting, and in Massachusetts, and that's going to be very popular. There's a move on now to allow people to run for office who are not citizens. We've already scrapped the idea that if you are a non-citizen, you're not allowed to participate in a campaign. They do that frequently. We don't prosecute it. It's de facto legal. People who are non-citizens can serve in the military. And the only one that I thought that would never alter is that when you and I come in, we have passports, so we can leave anytime we want. But if we do not have a passport, we lose it on the plane, we're put in a little room at passport control at an airport or a port. But I never thought that somebody could just walk back and forth across the border without a passport. In other words, they're enforcing rules for citizens that they're not enforcing for people from foreign nations.
Before I run out of time, one of the cornerstones of your book is that our elected officials in the elite governing class have sort of fallen in with the global crowd, forsaking national identity, considering love of country, even patriotism, to be something dirty and something to be smothered or pushed to the margins. Speak to me, if you will, for a moment, and I'm thinking of a man I knew well, Pope John Paul II, who once he was Pope, went back to his native Poland and not only reignited their national spirit, but also the faith that undergirded and informed that national spirit. Is that the cure here? Is that what it will take to revive the United States and other countries that are similarly disposed?
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot dilute and disperse your customs and values all over the world. You don't have the power, the influence to do so. The British Empire tried it, and yet Dickens wrote about how rotten it was at the core in London when they were all over the world. And we were in Afghanistan with pride flags and gender studies programs and George Floyd murals when we had, 600,000 people on our streets homeless. So that never works. And then for citizenship, Republican government, constitutional government is rare, Raymond. So today we have 190 nations, less than half of them even make an attempt to say that they're consensual. So why in the world would you turn over your sovereignty to a coalition of states, the UN General Assembly, when they're illiberal, when you would have Iran or China or North Korea adjudicating whether you're culpable in Afghanistan, or as Anthony Blinken invited the UN to judge whether we were racist in the aftermath of the George Floyd rioting. And so it's never worked. Napoleon tried it, the Romans tried it. It's not a stable system to give up state unity. The nation state's the only system with secure borders that inculcates common customs, traditions, unity, things in common among diverse peoples. But if you don't have borders, and you're a global Fabian socialism, we're all citizens of the world, the Greeks called cosmopolitanism, then you're everything and therefore you're nothing.
Victor Davis Hanson, I wish we had more time. The book is a sober and I think important meditation for any citizen anywhere. The book is The Dying Citizen: How Progressive Elites, Tribalism, and Globalization are Destroying the Idea of America, by Victor Davis Hanson. It's available in stores everywhere and online. Victor, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Raymond.